Welcome back, everyone, to Henderson's Department of Aviation Heart Start Information Sessions. Hopefully you've already watched Session 1, just a quick overview of the department and what we have to offer. Now we're going to get into Session 2 of our 3 information sessions, where we're going to start giving you more specific information about our flight training program. So just follow along. Hopefully you've already downloaded the information booklet that we provided a link for in Session 1. We'll provide that link again at the end of this session, but if you have that book handy and available, it will help as we go through our discussion today in this second session. So let's talk about Henderson's flight training program specifically. We do our flight training under FAA Part 141. This is much more stringent than Part 61. And we're not too worried about really getting into the technicalities of the regulations. Just why do we call them Part 61, Part 141? Well, there's a big thick book of it's called Code of Federal Regulations, CFRs, and within that are many sections and subtitles and sections. These are just a couple chapters out of the big federal regulation books. So Chapter 61 or Part 61 and Part 141 entails flight training requirements. And Part 141, like we said, is much more stringent than Part 61. Not only is it more stringent, but going under Part 141 actually reduces the time required to qualify for certificates. Just as a quick example, under Part 61, you would be required to have at least 250 hours of flight experience to get your commercial pilot certificate. However, under Part 141, you can do that with a substantial reduction in those flight hours. And we'll kind of go through those hours here in a little bit. And then also, as a Part 141 flight training curriculum, we have more direct FAA oversight of our curriculum and adherence to our regulations. So it just makes for a much more concise, efficient, and effective method of flight instruction. Mentioning this a little bit in Module 1 or in Session 1, we'll go ahead and talk about it again, and that is Restricted Airline Transport Pilot Certification from the FAA. We often refer to it as RATP, Restricted Airline Transport Pilot. If you go through a RATP program, then this is something that the FAA provides. You have to qualify for and be approved by the FAA to offer this, and Henderson has been approved by the FAA. Under this RATP program, you can become an airline pilot with only 1,000 flight hours of experience as opposed to 1,500. But to get that reduction of hours, you have to follow a specific set of courses approved by the FAA and get your flight training under Part 141, like I said that we do. So it's very structured as to how you receive your flight training. I'm going to give you kind of an example of that curriculum on the next slide. It's a screen print, so it might be a little small, but it is a reproduction of the RATP degree plan that's in that information booklet. So if you have that information booklet, you might want to go ahead and turn it to Professional Pilot Track for RATP. Excuse me. So here is that screenshot. You'll notice that we break this down by freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, and then we have left and right columns to signify fall semester or spring semester. So following this degree plan, you will get your commercial pilot certificate while qualifying for the RATP from the FAA. So this degree plan, we break down not only the aviation courses, but we also put in the liberal arts core that all Henderson students have to take, as well as place markers for electives or minor, or for your minor and such. So this outlines the aviation courses that are required to meet that RATP qualification. That information book will also have just those classes listed just as the aviation courses by themselves, and that totals up to 60 aviation academic hours that's required by the FAA. But we combine that with your full 4-year collegiate experience here, so those are spread out over 8 semesters over the 4 years. Again, if you don't have that book, you can scan this QR link now to get that information booklet. And again, I'll have this link available at the end of this session. So anyway, back to just the point of the matter. Following this curriculum, following this outline, will allow you to qualify for RATP. Now, you can progress through a professional pilot track in one of two ways. We've talked about RATP, but we do have some students that are not airline bound. They might be looking to go to the military and may not need to do the full RATP course of study. So we have the commercial pilot course that you can go through without the RATP qualifications. The only difference between the two is really just acquiring your flight instructor certificates and taking those associated classes for the flight instructor certificates. Becoming a flight instructor actually allows you two things. One, it does help you qualify for the RATP. But two, it lets you become a flight instructor. As a flight instructor, when you go fly with your students, you log that flight time. So it provides you as an avenue to acquire flight time. Also, as a flight instructor, you get paid to go fly. We currently pay our flight instructors either $22, $25, or $28 an hour, depending upon what level of certification you have. So becoming a flight instructor gives you the avenue to acquire more flight hours. It also provides you a way to get a paycheck. So if you're going to RATP, then you'll be taking those flight instructor courses and flight labs. If you don't need those flight instructor courses and flight labs, if you're pursuing the commercial track otherwise, then you do not have to take those flight instructor courses. One other thing about being a flight instructor. If you elect to work here at Henderson, our flight instructors stay very busy. Most of our flight instructors are being hired by the airlines about a year to a year and a half after graduation because they stay busy giving that flight instruction. It builds their logbook up that quick. Again, there's more detailed information in your information book. Please refer to pages 2 and 3 for the class flow, and then page 6 and 7 for the associated estimated cost it's broken down per semester of what these flight fees will be. And we'll get into flight fees in a little bit more detail here as we go along. So let's look at our aircraft fleet, see what we fly here at Henderson. We have 11 MAL MXT-7 4-place trainers. They rent for $123.25 an hour, $123 an hour, 25 cents. We also have 2 Piper Arrows with the glass cockpits. I showed you pictures of these in information session 1. The Piper Arrow rents for $145.25 an hour. We have 2 Piper Twin Comanches as our multi-engine trainers. They rent for $228 an hour. We have a Cessna 172 RG that rents for $127.25 an hour. We also have an American Champion Citabria, which is a tail dragger. We use that for spin endorsements in our CFI labs. That rents for $97.25 an hour. And then again, I mentioned in information session 1 that we have full motion sims on campus. We have 2 Redbird full motion simulators. They rent for $90.50 an hour. So we have a wide complement of aircraft that accommodate you in any phase of the flying that you'll be taking at Henderson. Now, these flight training fees are in addition to tuition and other Henderson fees. And again, we'll get into the specific fees here in a moment, but I always like to point out that flight fees are not covered by tuition. You pay on a per hour basis. Every hour that you fly, you're renting that aircraft on a per hour basis, and that's how these fees are based. How much per hour? These aircraft rates are subject to change at times. Our aircraft rental rate has stayed steady for many years, but inevitably maintenance cost does go up, insurance cost goes up. So any prices that I refer to here at a later date, they may be raised a little bit if just because things go up. Maintenance expenses increase, parts increase. Also, depending upon the fuel market at the time, a fuel surcharge may be levied to compensate for fluctuations in the fuel cost. Currently, we have a $12 per hour fuel surcharge that's added on to those aircraft rental rates. We really can't adjust those rental rates very easily, but we can adjust a fuel surcharge a little bit easier than we can a rental rate. That's why we have it broken down that way. So this allows us some flexibility when there might be a huge change in fuel cost. So we manage that as a separate fee. Our fee is not in hard print in some of our publications because they're put out for longer periods of time. We note that there's a fuel surcharge, but that fee, since it fluctuates, can't easily be put into print. So this is how we like to relay that information. So let's talk about fees now. We pointed out that the mall aircraft is $123.25 an hour. We also have flight instructor fees. Every time you go fly with a flight instructor, you will pay them on a per hour basis as well. And they're about $40 an hour. So what we do is we take, to provide you a little bit easier way to budget and to figure out what's it going to cost me an aviation major, we take each flight lesson, we know what the minimum time is for those, we know what the cost per hour is, and we do the math for you. The Intro to Aeronautics lab, the first lab that you take here, where the goal of that flight lab is to actually solo the airplane. You'll fly the airplane by yourself at the end of that lab. According to the FAA requirements, you have to fly at least 11.3 hours in that aircraft. So let's assume for a second that you'll fly for 11.3 hours in that lab. If you do the math, that would be $1,876.90 of aircraft rental. Because we rent the aircraft actually to the tenths of an hour, so you might fly for 1.1, 1.6 hours at times. So we fly to the tenth of an hour, bill to the tenth of an hour. So if you do everything to FAA minimum times, the aircraft rental will be $1,876.90. That will include the dual instruction for that lab. We also have ground instruction. That's when you need to spend one-on-one time with your flight instructor outside of the airplane, learning what you're going to do before the lesson, and perhaps reviewing how your lesson went at the conclusion of your lesson. So in the Intro to Aero lab, the ground time that's allotted there is $316.75, giving us a grand total of $21.93.65 if you conduct that in the minimum time. But here's the thing. We always like to point this out. Everyone learns to fly at a different pace. I like to make a sports analogy here. Let's say, what if you and your friend are going to go out and learn to play golf? You're going to swing a golf club for the first time in your lives. Y'all can have the same golf instructor, have the same golf club, be at the same place, and someone's just going to get better at swinging that club and driving the golf ball straight down the course sooner than the other. That doesn't mean that you're not both going to learn how to play golf and play well. It's just that everyone learns these tactile skills at a different pace. Because of that, we can't say that you will solo at exactly 11.3 hours. We just don't know when you're going to solo. We don't know how many flight hours it's going to take to acquire the skills to fly safely. And that's the bottom line of all of our flight labs. You have to demonstrate a certain skill level before you can advance to the next phase of training. So the best way to present this in a way to budget is to go with the FAA minimum. We know what you're going to have to do at a minimum. Present those flight costs and say you need to be prepared to budget over that to some degree as well, knowing that just about everyone flies more than that minimum time. We just have to have a baseline and then adjust on an individual basis. So for this particular lab, the Intro to Aeronautics lab, the first lab you're going to fly, where you will fly solo for the first time, our students actually average between 14 and 20 hours of flight time for that lab. We have some that on occasion will do less than that and be closer to that 11 or 12 hours. But really, our average window is somewhere between 14 to 20 hours. If it takes more than 20 hours, it could just be that it's taken a little longer to get this tactile skill down. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to fly well. You just need to be prepared for that. So whether you do it in fewer than 14 hours or more than 20 is not an indicator of anything in particular. We just like to point out everyone learns to fly at a different pace. and your flight training ultimately will be charged on a per hour basis. So if it takes you more hours to obtain the skill that's necessary to move from one stage to the next, then you'll be billed accordingly. The private pilot lab is where you build upon soloing and learn to fly, learn to fly across countries, do some night flying. This is where, at the culmination of this lab, where you will receive your FAA private pilot certificate. There's 27 hours of flight time in that one, along with ground time, and I'll have some more specifics here in a moment of this in all of our labs. But this lab, flown at FAA minimum time, is $4,902.68. But again, you probably will spend more than 27 hours, so you need to be prepared to budget over that. Now, when you look at the FAA times, let me go back to the previous slide just to show what we're doing here. It shows that the Intro to Aero Lab is 11.3 hours of flight time. Back to our current slide, it shows the Private Pilot Lab is 27 hours of flight time. You add those together, that's 38.3 minimum hours to earn the Private Pilot Certificate here at Henderson. Our students tend to average in the 45 to 60 hour range to get their Private Pilot Certificate. So again, you need to be prepared to budget for 45 to 60 flight hours. The national average to get the private is 70 hours, so we're still beating the average even at 60, or if you come in under. But if you go over 60, that's not detrimental to your grade. You just need to be prepared to budget for that. So again, all the prices that we're going to present are the FAA minimum flight hours required. Just be advised that you'll be paying per hour. So if you go over those FAA minimums, the per hour rate applies to that as well. So I'm not going to go in detail of all of our labs. Again, that is in that information booklet, but here is a spreadsheet that shows what our labs are. It shows the minimum flight hours. I just covered the first two, the Intro to Aeronautics Lab and the Private Pilot Certification Lab. It shows the flight hours, the flight costs associated there, the ground hours, the associated ground cost, and then the total as you're going from left to right. And then if you add all these up for all the flight labs that's required for RATP, then that gives you a total of 268 hours of flight time, 107 ground hours, and the math works out to be $52,392.58. So $52,000, a little more, to get all the flight certificates and ratings that's offered here. Now, if you're not going to go RATP, then you're not going to need the CFI lab. You're not going to need the CFII lab. You're not going to need the MEI lab. You can still take those if you want, but they're not required. So that would be a savings of roughly $10,000 to $11,000 if you're not pursuing RATP. And again, all that information is in the information booklet in more detail. There are some pilot supplies that you'll need to buy. Most of these are a one-time purchase, and you'll use them in all your flight labs. The only exception to that is going to be a grade book. You'll need to buy one of those for every lab. They're currently $21.25. But as far as flying for the first semester, this is your pilot supplies, things that can be purchased at the airport. That's your headsets, the reading material that you're going to need, your aviation books that you'll need, as well as your full strainer, logbook, etc. If you buy these items individually, it's $331.35, but we sell it as a package of $300. And again, this can all be purchased at the airport local. You're not required to get this here. If you want to buy this stuff elsewhere, that's perfectly fine. The only exception to that, again, will be the grade book, because the grade books here are the FAA approved 141 training grade syllabus and grade book, so those would have to be purchased here. As previously noted, all flight times are FAA minimum times. I said you need to budget accordingly. How much? We like to say roughly 10% over, but again, this varies from individual to individual. It could be more than that. We just cannot peg an exact amount because everyone's going to learn to fly at a different pace. But as far as budgeting, with the exception of that first Intro to Aero Lab, it's 11.3 hours. You might fly as many as 20 hours. So that one you might actually want to look at doubling your budget for that lab, just because of that wide range. But once you obtain those flight skills that's necessary to solo in that first Intro to Aeronautics lab, as long as you fly consistently, as long as you fly about 3 times a week so that you don't build up rust, if you fly consistently, you'll really get a lot closer to those FAA minimum times. And at that, probably about a 10% or so addition to the FAA minimum would allow you to budget a little bit more accurately. I want to talk a moment about safety. That is our first and foremost and most important aspect to everything we do. We're not going to do anything but what is managed and safe. Back to soloing that first semester, I'll explain how this will go a little bit to know that it's not just whimsical. Everything is procedural and checked and double checked. First off, students aren't going to fly solo until they know Henderson rules, FAA rules, as well as their aircraft systems, their aircraft operator's handbook. It's called a POH, Pilot Operating Handbook, or Airplane Flying Manual, whichever one happens to be issued for the aircraft. So you have to be knowledgeable of the material along with obtaining your flight skills. So our students are held to high standards of knowledge. Also, we incorporate stage checks in our 141 syllabus. So students aren't going to progress from one stage of training to the next, but what they successfully complete a stage test administered by a different flight instructor than their normal flight instructor, and that flight instructor has been approved by the FAA to be what's called a check instructor. Not every flight instructor is a check instructor. So you'll normally fly with your regular flight instructor, but when it comes time for a stage check, you'll fly with a different check instructor to make sure that you meet all the safety criteria and knowledge criteria that we have at that moment. So again, every step of progression is going to be evaluated for safety and knowledge. As far as the aircraft, the FAA does require that we inspect them every 100 hours. We actually pull them in every 50 hours. We do an oil change and some other checks on it every 50 hours. We're going to be just as safe as possible. We know you want everyone to fly safely, so do we. So with all this, is it worth the investment? We've been talking about the cost of flight training. This time scale will show what you can anticipate as you progress through your career. And we start in college. You know, as a traditional student, you'll start as an aviation student at 18 years of age. If you stay on track with our RATP track to become a flight instructor sometime around 21, 22 years old, you'll be a flight instructor now starting to make $22 to $28 an hour. Keeping on track, roughly around a year or two after that, 3 years maybe, somewhere in the ages of 23 to 26 years old, you'll probably go to work as a first officer for a regional airline making $40 an hour or more. Now, here's the thing about airline pay. You're going to be flying about 1,000 hours a year. So how much are you going to make annually? Just add 3 zeros to these numbers. So if you're making $40 an hour, you'll be making about $40,000 a year. But notice that only a couple years after being a first officer, you'll probably move over to the left seat as a captain, and that'll be making about $70 an hour. After you fly for the regional airline for a few years, you'll probably want to move over to the major airlines. Doing that transition, you'll become a first officer, sitting in the right seat again of a bigger aircraft, using data right now for both Republic and Delta Airlines, so kind of qualify where we're getting these numbers. So a first officer at Delta, when this data was taken, was $86 an hour. Gain some more years of seniority, move over to the left seat as a captain. Now you'll be making roughly $150 an hour, $156 an hour. And then from that, moving on up in age, getting more and more seniority. When you retire from the airlines, you'll be making probably in excess of $300,000 a year. So is it worth the investment? We really believe so. We equate it sometimes as the same as to going to law school or med school, except this is not pre-law or pre-med. It's not pre-aviation. 4 years through our program, work a little bit as a flight instructor, go to the airlines, and see your career take off. We believe it's a good investment. So with that, we'll end session 2. And again, there's an email link. You can email us at aviation@hsu.edu if you have any additional questions. And take your phone, take your iPad, your tablet, scan this QR code and download that information booklet if you've not done so already. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining in with us, and we will hopefully see you in the third of our 3 information sessions. Look forward to seeing you this fall. Thank you.